Thank you, Brian. And I want to thank everybody for showing up to the Kiamichi Mountains Bigfoot Conference 2024. I really appreciate that. I want to thank the organizers for putting this thing on. This is our second annual event. I was fortunate part of the first one. And if this cuts off again, I'll try to do my best to hesitate. And I'm just good to be back here again with you guys in Tallahassee, Oklahoma. So I'm going to start a brief introduction. And that is that my name is Robert Kryder. I own and operate an exploration company and have since the 90s. And we do a lot of high-end historical, deep earth imaging and stuff like this, all the way up to treasure recovery. We work with the government, work with cops on stuff. We work with a lot of private individuals. But needless to say, most of the work we did happened to be in very remote, very rugged areas. That tends to be where people hide things over the last so many thousands of years. And so we ended up in regions and positions and places that these creatures, be it people, occupied. And they just became a part of our reality. Not so much something that we were ever looking directly at, but something we often had to deal with. That being said, I had a major project up until about 2009, 2010, and it all went real sour. The big treasure world could be really crazy if you think Bigfoot world's bad. So I had seen online about 2010 as well, when YouTube started getting to be a big thing. I wanted to go see about these animals. I've been interested in them since I was a young child. I had a first encounter, an audio encounter at close range being screamed at in Washington State. And, that kind of stuff never went away. Family stories and things from northern New Mexico. We had a lot of land in the upper mountains. People don't realize there's glacier lakes up there, and a lot of country way above timberline. It's very rugged, very remote. Regardless, in 2010, when I began to actually look into the subject, what other people have been posting and presenting, I saw things like, for a rough example at the same time, a Bigfoot title, well, Bigfoot does this or that, and I look at it and it's a guy in a suit on a quad eating an ice cream cone. And I got really bummed about that because I've had a true interest in this since my earliest memories, which are very young. And so I thought, you know what, I just got screwed over in this major world with all this. I have a lot of equipment, I have teams of personnel, I have a ton of contacts. We're trained, we have a lot of ability to document, to observe, to access basically any region under any condition or circumstance or weather. And so I thought, screw it, I'll just throw out the treasure grab and I'll go for broke on Bigfoot. As a result, over my team, a very valued guy, a good friend of mine named Doug Rice, asked me straight up, he said, so boss, what's all this? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Bigfoot, is that what we're doing now? And I said, yeah, that's what we're doing. And he said, okay, is it real? I said, you're damn right it's real. He said, okay. And that's kind of where we shifted our focus. And it just so happened to be, maybe it was destiny, divine intervention, I don't know, that we moved into a trailer house where there was active things happening with the subject. And they didn't ever, the people before us never recognized what it was. It was kind of a bachelor pad. And they took their leftovers and used to throw them over the edge of the deck, which was above the edge of this canyon. And they would do that every day, all the time. Well, after a little while, we moved in there. My girl at the time was cooking bacon-wrapped pollock, of all things. And then she went on to cook, had chocolate cake baking. And when I left the kitchen, which we had big bay windows on the sides of it, something slammed the trailer, double wide, so hard, and it's on a concrete foundation, it's not on stabs, so hard it shook the entire place. And I went back into that corner of the house, and she was just staring dumbfounded. And we assumed that a horse had hit it, went outside, and the horses were all standing there. We thought one ran out and hit the house somehow, because what else, could do that? And then I heard something walking off, and we realized, holy crap, we're right here, it's right here, we're an opportunity. Well, this kind of went on, and we ended up discovering the family unit that this subject was involved in. And we did that through producing sound equipment, and which eventually turned into the KXPD3 that I have over in the corner. But initially, we were building 36-inch parabolics and putting them on top of the mobile laboratory that we had from our previous work. And so we were getting them 22 feet off the ground with 36 inches. And that gives you a tremendous ability for distance and range. And so we were tracking what they were doing at about a 2-mile many years of this research that you're about to see. A lot of it's also mixed in, and the evidence that we present on the table is the majority from that group. So without further delay, we'll get on into the presentation. So this presentation is Bigfoot Homo sapiens cognatus, as it's classified. It's on the ecology, behavior, and man versus ape. And that goes into the questionable facts about DNA. It's very short. This is normally a 2.5 hour presentation. I'm going to try to slam this out in an hour. Study region, USA, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Oklahoma, and Michigan. And these are the places we've been brought into by different people who've had a chance to look around and notice common factors. Even with 1,550 miles between zones of study, the same common factors exist. And that's a pretty good variation to be looking at these individual things, some of which you'll see here. So it's presented by myself, my company, Kryder Exploration. We're going to start this, if it starts, let's see. We're going to start this with a quote by Sir Conan Doyle. It says, "When you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be truth." And that's a simple thing that we need to say. It's not necessarily the basis for science, but it's something so important to take an analytical view of every single thing we see and not throw anything out the window. If it walks like a duck, probably is a duck. Now we're going to start with ecology. Part 1 is diet and acquisition. So we need to see things that they subside on that have a health value and also can be found year-round. And there's a lot of resources. One of the things that any large hominin is going to require partially or wholly in their diet is greens or algae or things like that. And it's very important to find, if you want to look into the study of it, to find these sources, because these are things that are often overlooked, except up in here we have just like a deciduous empire. And there's just so much available. But in wintertime, where are your available greens? And these are often a place where you're going to find group habitation and the individuals that are less they can't traverse as well. So the individuals that are less transitory or move about less will often be situated around these spots. Russian olive fruit. This is something that covers a lot of the river systems in North America as an infiltrator, but what it's done is allowed the species to travel great distances up and down the river corridors in North America, even into the deep southwest and desert regions like Weir and high desert. We research anywhere from 4,500 feet elevation up to 10,000 feet elevation, and these can be found in all of the lower regions, anywhere below, say, 8,000, 7,500. So they allow access from those elevation changes without having to get out of them. They provide both cover and, more importantly, a constant food source year-round. So after the fruit is ripe, it drops, and it remains edible on the ground all the way until the following season. Pinyon pine, excuse the error there. Pinyon pine, something that's very, very important as well would be protein in the diet, and a lot of things that when they can't acquire meat proteins, or you need it more constant than that. You're not always running around the sides of the hill. You got family, you got old subjects, kids, and everything else. They need something just to sit and subside on. The less transitory individuals, like the large females, those things we've noticed do this as well, where they'll find a common food source. And if it's not in the river bottoms, you'll also have pine nuts. And where there is pine nuts, you almost always have the feeding of that in bulk, which a lot of other animals are not successful at doing. Now, for treatment, we look into the diet. This is something, juniper berries, this is what they run gin from. These are very astringent, but what they were consumed by natives as well as other animals to resolve gut issues. Now, how the animals know, we don't know, but even there's canine that will eat these, and they believe it's to alleviate gastric issues or gut issues. And we also occasionally see these subjects consuming the same things. Okay, to survive. So what do you eat? And a lot of biologists overlook things when they map out the bulk calorie or caloric intake of a large animal. They say, well, you couldn't have a large animal in this environment because you couldn't develop the caloric intake here to support it. And we kind of go against that through physical finds in the research. Don't say the same thing, because what they are eating often supersede in the end what the biologists understand that they would eat if they had the ability. This is a yucca root. So yucca can be found from all the way at sea level, and variations of this like Spanish Main up all the way up to 11. And so they're a pretty constant source if you've got them and you need it. Here we see where yuccas were pulled out, representing about 1,500 plants altogether. We don't know how long a duration of time that was over. But what was common, rip the plant loose from its root base, and even bear it, like dig out the root base. And then they would bite off just the bottom of each stem. Now, I learned from this, and I do this as well. So when I get in these trade in these places, I'll do the same thing, because it's actually good, it's good for you, and it has available moisture, and we see them doing it. Now, in the right-hand photo, you'll also notice there's kind of a cupped version to that. That is an actual tooth form from the incisor, from biting it. And you'll notice in even this in the following photos, that form is about, it's the same type as a modern human, at about twice the size. So to forage, something you're going to go out and look for, you need protein, and it's on a pretty common basis. It may not be big, it may not be, but what it is it's something you can readily get and you can depend upon. And we've noticed that birds seem to be part of that system. So it's something that, even though it's small and it seems insignificant to a large creature, it's not something they overlook. And we've noticed one of the tactics, as shown here, this is a woodpecker. And what they've done is, often we see where at night, they'll just put a couple of fingers in the hole, tear out the side of the tree, pick out the bird. The interesting part about it that tells a lot about the psychology of the animal we're dealing with, the subject, and it's almost across the board, so this is kind of universal, is they don't consume the whole bird, for one, which a lot of animals have to do because they don't have dexterity or fingers. Two, they'll fully pluck it, and then they'll place all the feathers in a little neat pile. Now, if the wind blows on this stuff, these feathers are gone. This was probably 30 minutes after the consumption that we were able to locate this, and almost nothing had been disturbed. And you can see even the small downy feathers are there and present without even being gone. But it's just amazing why they do that. They make such a neat pile, not just toss them everywhere. Diversity in the diet. This is a good example of what maybe a biologist wouldn't assume that they would eat, because hardly anything does. The porcupine, and we know this because we have scat related to them that contains Russian olive seeds and other things. So you have basically either an omnivore or a vegetarian consuming the Russian olive, and then something that's not crunching them up that's able to do that. And then as well, it has porcupine quills in the scat still attached to the flesh. And not a lot of stuff will or can pass whole porcupine quills. It takes an extremely robust system. And what we notice is the larger animals get, the tougher their tissues often get. You'll see elephant eating thorns 3 inches long and just crunching them up like they're nothing. It doesn't bother their tissues because of their size and mass. And that's what's indicative of being able to pass a porcupine quill. Now, primary diet source, we all know, is deer. At least in every region we've studied so far, it appears that deer is something they get along with, for one. They don't seem to spook them or run them out. Deer in the regions we often go into are less afraid of humans than other spots. Because, I guess, they hunt them in a way that's doesn't chase off the herd, let's say. And in those same regions, there's not a lot of predators because of their presence. In this point, we see where there's also at the top of the bone on the right, the same dentation or the same bite marks from the same dentation as what was in the yucca, which would be an incisor about 1/2 inch wide. Here again, as an alternate food source that they don't seem to do all the time, at least in the regions we've seen, but they do on occasion. And sometimes we find bone deposits, and it seems like things they either take them there because it's obscure and they can consume it, or they don't want the remains of them being found. So in real odd places you'll find where it's a repeated deposition of livestock bone. And there won't be deer and stuff usually in these regions. There'll be places where you might end up with various cattle bones over time, usually only parts of cows carried in there, or you might even find horse remains in that situation. Often you don't find deer and other things like that. In this particular picture on the right, as you can see again, is the same scallop or cut mark from the front of the incisor at the same size, about a little over 1/2 inch wide. The method that we're describing, this is how they grub logs, and a little bit of differences between them and a bear. So in a bear, you're not going to see obvious marks and teeth marks because that's the only thing it has to work with. When it opens like this, and it's this high off the ground, so this log's about 25 inches thick. It's 40 inches, 44 inches off to the top. They would usually tear out the side and claw the side. This is open completely on the top. And what they're doing here is getting the grubs. And we found later that they'll even eat the dust that the grubs leave in the little tubes. I don't know what's up with that. But in this case, you'll also see where pieces were picked up and placed sideways, vertically and moved over instead. And so, this is just one of the methods that they acquire food and how we can kind of tell the difference. This is a whole different package now because this infers a lot about their behavior, even though it's in the diet section here, and that is digging with sticks. And so we've seen this quite a bit. It's not surprising, especially in this area because of the way the riverbeds and the arroyos are and where the food is sitting, where it's at, where these animals are at. And in this situation, we had prints from two different subjects. They're medium-sized subjects, one a little larger, one a little smaller. We often find out hang out together through the prints and for evidence. And in this case, they had dug out this burrow, and they used a stick. And the stick, with the damage from the digging, is laying there in the bottom left photo. It's in the bottom left of that picture. That's the actual tool that was used. So when they were done, they just tossed it and did what they did. And you can see on the right-hand photo that the marks are linear and they're spaced evenly. And that's not something that any canine or a bear or anything else is going to do repeatedly over the whole structure of the dig. There's going to be sideways marks, all kinds of different directions. The distances are going to change in between them. But the reason that you do this with a stick is because that's the most efficient you can remove the dirt. If you look at the distances there, it's just perfect. It's the way a person that digs with a stick would dig, not the way any other animal would dig with claws or fingers or anything like that. Another method that we see quite frequently, not only for defense or warning or even play, but for hunting, is rocks. So projectiles can be extremely effective. A rock, a small 3/4 pound rock could be fatal thrown by a human. You can imagine what it could be like where a 1.5 pound or 2 pound rock could be thrown by one of these things. I'm sure they could actually wound or take out a deer, disable or take out a deer with the rock just size. This is another example, rocks and for large game. You can take anything out with that power at a rock this size. This rock is somewhere to 80, 85 pounds, and it's solid granite. On the right-hand picture, you can actually kind of see how big it is. It's kind of flat. We had, this rock was actually taken from a trackway with 170 tracks with 3 different individuals, and the big one was real big. His cast is on my table. And his hands were 16 inches long. And he had carried this rock apparently around because all the people we had did a big circle around this for about 100 feet out each direction. And we never found where this rock came from because it's all dirt stained where it was pulled out of the ground, but we couldn't find where it was picked up. And so he carried it to this position, and then the other two apparently were moving game down toward him. There was a deer prints that run right along the side of this, and they stopped at the rock. The bushes flattened down, the rocks laying there, no more deer prints. And his handprints are just below it. So it was indicative, it was pretty self-explanatory of what the situation was there. And you get hit with a rock that weighs 80, 85 pounds coming out of something that can throw it, it's going down. It doesn't matter what it is. So tracks, this is a favorite. Here I'm going to show an example, graphic example, of what you would normally see. Now the lower picture in the lower left, that's actually the same subject as the big track on the table. These are 22-inch prints. And this is, you can see the mid-tarsal region where the heel goes in and then the forefoot goes in real big and deep. And that's what we expect to find. We want to see these things. We think, oh, what's a Bigfoot track? And we look for these tracks where you see people present evidence of what designates a track. And I'll tell you, some of the best names out there contradict or are contradicted by the physical evidence when you spend enough time in researching in the field, because you see some of the laws being applied to the rules and regulation of what is and what isn't, and it's not correct. In this case, I'm going to show you some dramatic examples of what's actually found most of the time that people don't know about. And these are the marks that we see. So on the top of this graphic on the right, we have a form of kind of like a paisley form, and that's actually the side of my fist, or the side of a human type or hominin type fist. than anything else if they're in general movement. And they stop, sometimes they'll put a flat hand down, but if you do that, you risk damage. If you put your knuckles down, it doesn't feel good to put knuckles down on hard or regular surfaces. Often this is the most common hand placement we actually find. And it's actually highly overlooked by anybody who's out there tracking them. This does not look anything like what you'd expect. And often when they're doing this, they're only using a couple of surfaces on the toe of the foot. Now, everything on top are hand placement surfaces. 2 fingers, 3 fingers, thumb, all this stuff is explained there within that. Some of it's obvious, some of it's not. Some almost looks paw-like because they'll put down just their palm and then their bent fingers in a really flat manner, and it almost looks like a paw. We have an addition of that from the individual on the table. Now, in the footprint section, as I said before, when they're in quad mode, oftentimes they're barely touching their toes. They're just on 2 big toes, 3 toes, maybe just the great toe and the supporting structure of the first metatarsal will touch. And so when people are tracking them and they go quad, and especially if they go quad and move sideways, it's almost impossible to recognize what that movement's going to look like. And people will lose track instantaneously and have a good track away and lose track instantaneously. And that's often what's occurred, is they either went arboreal or they just went quad. I'm not talking about an open field of snow where tracks vanish. And that just doesn't just happen with Bigfoot. That happens with people, that happens with deer, cows, all that has all been affiliated to tracks that just vanish in the middle of nowhere in a snowy or open field or sand. So something's going on there, but we have no direct indication that the anomaly that's causing that has anything to do with Bigfoot. We just know what we're doing when we do the track. And personally, we've seen where people have sworn they vanished even and still been able to track them out. But that only comes because understanding their movement marks and then the technique that we use to evade tracking. See if it's going to cooperate. Okay, so on the lower left is another form of print behavior, and these are fist marks. And these are from the large female of the family group. The spread here, as you can see, between the two is about 2 3/4 feet apart. And up to, like, if you were to actually measure the center of each wrist, it's a little over 3. So the fists here are 7.5 inches wide, and she's just a little over 10 foot with a 19-inch foot. That ratio remains pretty consistent over most of the subject we've seen. And in this case, with her knuckles down, when you do it or I do it, and even if you hold onto a bar, just a little wider than your shoulders, it's not very comfortable to hold it straight. So if you relax and do it ergonomically, it's going to be a little bit of an angle. And that angle is represented here as well. So if a person were to do the anatomical work on it, you could pretty well get the shoulder width and everything else just off the angle that those fists are and the width. On the right-hand side is a knuckle mark of a pretty good-sized individual. I mean, because this is only one section of knuckle. So if you look at your finger, you look at your size of your hand, and you look at that one section of knuckle, that's what we're looking at here, and they're over 3 inches long, just that one section. Now mine here is about 1.25 inches, so more than twice my size. Here's the tracks of the subject whose print's on the table, or this is actually be a hand print. So this print, my palm, my outstretched hand, fit exactly within the parameters of my palm in that. So the hand is 16 inches long and 15 inches wide spread out. And the foot length average would have been about 22 inches off a hand that size, 21, 22 inches. Which we have a 19-inch shown over there, but it's missing the ends of the two. Now this next one is, it's a pretty neat set. It's something not a lot of people get to see, and only because we were around this family unit a lot, and we get it out of here. We used to do it a real lot. We're 165 miles from it now. But at this time, we were very close to going there. I was alone a lot, all the time. And I got the chance to see this. And this is where a juvenile subject, who we've got names for him just for reference in our records. This would have probably been Amos. He was on a hardback gravel. So most of our riverbeds, unless it's sand or fresh mud, you're not going to leave a mark. Your horse barely leaves a mark with a hard hoof. So anything else could cruise it. But there's these sandbars. And the kids are funny. That's how we've got a lot of our evidence. The big ones or the small ones. Either the kids or dealing with the kids. And in this situation, we did recover a larger print on the edge, but in this case, we have what looks like a juvenile on its knees, and it's putting its fist down and pushing itself along on its knees. And it even defecated a little inside the deal, which is the same standard defecation with Russian olive and other things in it. And then something was able to reach out to it, probably at least 6-7 feet, and pick it up and just pull it out. So in this sand, these tracks progress across the sand like this for a good little ways, and then they just vanish. They go nowhere. Like it just but what it is one of the larger ones was quit leaving tracks and or whatever. We know it had reached out over the sand and just picked that subject up out of it completely. And we've seen that several times. That's how we ended up with the double step print that we have over there. Was the little one that's on the table, the small tracks ran out in the mud. He had to step in the mud to get the little one, took a few steps back and stepped back in his own print when he went the other way in the mud, and we got them both. We got where the little one just stopped in thin air and he wrapped, so you could see the whole scenario. Okay, so in our next one, on the bottom left, these are just kind of going to be examples of tracks within the family unit and a couple other places too. And some of these have every attribute you know of a Bigfoot print, and some of these have attributes you what you think is a human print. But the base morphology, so the angles between the bone structure, not the overall shape, is what we look at to make that determination. So we may have squared off toes, like a lot of little ones do. Some of the ones we have over here, which are the subject from the bottom left, they're very pointy, almost elf-like, with a large taper. And that diversity can happen within the species. It's not a defining factor. So here's the track, and this is a toddler. This is one of the first young in this group we actually track now. Something important to look at is the print on the right is not distorted. That's the actual shape of the print at this size. And you can see on this subject, the size of the great toe and the first metatarsal of that toe structure is massive. It represents 50% of the length of the foot. Now, in a human child, human kids don't have feet like that at all. They have these little bitty pink little toes on their pink little feet. They don't have a great toe and first metatarsal that represent half of their foot length. It would look crazy if you saw a little kid like that. But that's exactly how all their feet are at a small size. That whole structure is greatly exaggerated. And then they grow very quickly into that. And believe it or not, even as the trick gets up to like 15 inches, it isn't changed the great toe structure all that much. The rest of the foot has grown a lot, but that structure hasn't grown all that much. And here's another track that would be considered both of these pretty classic. So the one on the left shows full mid-tarsal break, the whole 9 yards, except it has a taper. We've been told, what? If it has a taper, it's probably not Bigfoot. That's not true. On the right-hand side, we see a much boxier foot, and this is all within the same unit. So the diversity of feet, it's like a family where, all the kids will have like this, and there's Johnny, he's got feet like a monster. He's got huge, big old wide feet, and the rest of the family does. Well, that same type of genetic diversity pops up within this group. And the foot on the right, of course, it would be indisputable to somebody saying, oh, well, there's absolutely no arch, it's completely flat, it's boxy in shape. But what's another misdefining factor? It's narrow and there's a taper to the heel. That's not a defining factor. There's a lot of different feet variation, even in all animals, that would certainly make up for that much difference. This is the track that's on the table. This was George when he was smaller, so he's now 15-inch foot or whatever, but when he was 9, we pulled these. And this is during midwinter time when it would be extremely cold water and he was going in and out of the water. And you can see on the right-hand photo, there's like a deflation to the foot, and that comes from really cold water. Matter of fact, it was in the 20s above, and only the water was the only thing not frozen, was the cruising little creek. And so he was coming out of that, he had a little spot on the edge of that, and that's where we got this. Most importantly, on the right-hand side of it, may not show too well here, it's actually not too bad. I'll interfere here. So right here, there's a round structure. You can kind of make that out in macrodermal ridges. And it's interesting because at our last conference in Nebraska, I had a biologist come up to me, also a professor. And he comes from the full, skeletal and muscle specialist. And he told me that something that was odd about these to him was that form right there. But he could explain it. And a foot that has a hinge that's straight across, and when we talk about an arch, we're not talking this. What we're talking about is this in the bones. people think the arch is this, and it's not. It's the thing that prevents the foot from bending. The arch comes because the bones are a few on top of the two center ones are higher in the middle, so there's no, it can't bend. In theirs, that set has to be all the way across flat. And he said, if that's the case, would be the only explanation for that marking in the macrodermal. Because the bone there is not raised up, it's actually able to drop all the way down, which allows that foot to hinge. And that mark is also what we've seen consistent as they get a little older. So the little bitty ones don't seem to have much of it. By the time they're 9.5, 10 inches, they've got a pretty well-defined circular pattern there. And we can't develop that because our bone in our foot cannot drop to the bottom like that. Okay, here's another one that's a pretty generalized track. It looks extremely tapered, but if you really look at it, it looks like the front of the foot's almost been broken, and that's then turned a little bit to an angle, and that's not damage. It's not from the step. Every step in that track way to look like that, and we may have, I think we even have a cast over there of that subject on the table, and what that is the angle of the foot's actually changed. It's 30 degrees different than ours. So from the back of the first metatarsal to the front of the fifth, the first is your back of your great toe structure, and then the front of the bone from your fifth are at an angle in humans, so a modern human foot. And one of these feet, they're straight across, so it represents perpendicular to the heel and to the length. And that's what we see that we track, who we look for. This is, yeah, like it says, adolescent of 10. Then this is too young, so this is what we call kind of babysitter syndrome going on. So these two are always around each other. The little larger one always has the little one. Sometimes the little ones leave the knuckle prints with one hand only as they walk and things. So, but you can see both of these are very indicative of being a good track. The smaller one, again, is more boxy, and that's that smaller subject. And then the larger one is a little larger. And you can see, though, if you look at in the right-hand photo, in the bottom strip, you still note the size of the great toe and the great toe structure. It's still almost half the length of the foot. And these are still up to 9 to 11 inches. Here's another 14 inches. And you can see the left-hand photo is very odd looking. It looks like it would have possessed an arch. And that's just bending its foot and put the side of its foot down. So if you really look closely, it almost forms that paisley shape I showed you before. So their hand is not the only thing they'll place down that way. They'll keep the central section of the foot, because if you hit anything hard there, you're going to damage your foot. So they'll often, if you can see it's on kind of a rocky strata, they'll often put their feet down in that way just to probably it's more comfortable, less potential damage to the foot. The other is the same subject when they got into sand, and you can see pretty much straightforward print with the two impression sections because of the mid-tarsal break and the transfer power. Here's another young adult that we did a lot of work on. It was in and out of the family group. This was up on the mountain. He had been seen. He's kind of a tannish, yellow grass in color. And he had left. We went up and did some work, put a game camera up and other things. And we were able to find a trackway from him. And you can see them here. So in the bottom left-hand photo, in the very bottom of it is my boot print. And just above that, his track. So that's a 17-inch, every bit of 17-inch track. And it's had a light blow of snow over it that evening next night, and then we stepped there, and he apparently was either tracking a rabbit or whatever through this, because the rabbit holes don't look deeper and more fresh, but they're not. They just, his tracks are not as deep, and then both of them set were filled with a half inch or a little more of powdered blow in. And so apparently he was following a rabbit. We can see where he's overstepped the rabbit track in the right-hand photo. So we can see that he was actually following a rabbit along as he was walking and doing this thing. This is tracks of the adult female. And so I say 19 to 20 inches. So sometimes you measure her prints are 20, sometimes you measure them 19, depending on how she's putting her foot down. In the lower left photo, the top of it, you can see what looks like my boot print. And the bottom may not be apparent at first. It may look like there's a deep divot on the left. But if you look closely on the right, the bottom set, it's the same exact, there's another divot there. That's one foot. And so you can see my foot would almost fit her heel. It's how much bigger that 20-inch leaves in sand than my boot would leave in sand. And on the right-hand side as well, this is, that's her coming down a bank. And now I can walk around on that bank and I barely scuffed the surface of it, and you can see the weight. She was literally breaking the side of the bank out as she's going down. This is on the lower left, this is the only prints we've ever got of a big male, so 10 years in there with this group. Hundreds of times within the group, 40 feet from the group. 40 feet from individuals in the group during daylight or at night. Had never found a mark in the first 6 years of the big male. We hear him, we track him with the parabolic. We could tell just where he is, his speed down the river, and we'd go down there and only find the family, but not him. And then the lower left game, like I said, 6 years. And that's where he punched through ice that was about 4 inches thick, and everything else could walk across it all. Deer were walking across it, and nothing was punching holes through it. But whatever he did, he crossed this thing and punched holes through it as he went, and the last step out was 12 feet. So what's on the ground there in the lower left-hand photo, that's between them is a 7-foot stick, so that's an 8-foot step. On the right-hand side is a print. I took that photo maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, after it was made, with the subject standing 40 feet from me in the material, and I was taking its picture. And people say one way or another about mind speak and how weird that is, but everybody understands we've got other perceptions. And during this moment, though, honest to God, I heard the feeling in my head, not the words, but the feeling in my head. And I don't usually go to the woo, I'm telling you, I'm a deer. Or no, I'm a cow. I'm a cow. I'm just a cow. And I literally said out loud, and I'm not even joking, I'm not embarrassed to even say it. I literally said out loud, "You're not a damn cow. I'm looking at your feet print. I just saw you run through here. I know for a fact you're not a cow. I'm looking at your prints, dude." So it's an odd situation for me, but that's happened, and it's happened actually more than once. So, but that print on the right there, that's 23 inch, and that's every day. So if you ever want to follow up on that, there's 2 videos produced. I highly recommend the second one. It's called "Waking the Giant," and I ran into him with him asleep, and he spooked awake and rolled over in front of me without really any obstruction except a few branches he was behind. And then that started the encounter. And I was in there for about an hour and 45 minutes with him, and tried like hell to get. I got him on video. I raised my arm over the brush, and he was several feet higher than my raised arm, and he peeks through and is peering at the camera. It's not the greatest in a lot of foliage, but you can see him. And but anyway, that's that video if you guys want to check. Okay, that's going to move on to foliage manipulation, protection and structures. So we find an awful lot of structures, and they're built in a lot of different ways. And sometimes they're just with teepee leaders and things like that. We understand those are probably routes of travel. These, of this type, is a little different. They seem to be more purpose-built. Like you could stuff a youngster in there and cover it up with sticks, and maybe your kid would be eaten by a mountain lion or whatever, I don't know. But then we also found in the lower left-hand photo, we also found renditions that were very small, like, and we don't understand what those be. Some of them were knocked all down, but a couple were up, and they seem to be about the size. The biggest thing you could stuff in there is maybe a wild turkey, and that's it. But I think the wild turkey jumping around would get out, so to speak. So we're not sure exactly what the purpose was. Here's purpose below. This is a type of shelter that's constructed, at least where we are, because you have these extremely arid regions and you can't get out of the sun in places in between the riparian zones. And in this case and a few others, they've taken brush from up above and drug it off and stacked it all up where it turns into a sunshade, so that potentially if they're caught in here, have to stay the day or through part of a hot day or whatever, they've got somewhere to be where there's no other cover. These are pretty common most places, and they need a lot more than people would assume. And I can't go into all the detail of that because I'm trying to ram this out, but in the lower left is a type of break they'll often do in a spot that they occupy. So this will be on the edge of zones where they're going to hang out, where they're going to eat and do their thing. And they're almost anal about doing this. And we've seen the same type of stuff for Michigan, all the way to Arizona or whatever, it doesn't matter. They do the same type and the same type of behavior. On the right side, and I have gone in, I've tracked and gone to the group and got in the group during daylight, following those things before, just like they do, until you find where they're wet and super fresh, hours old, and then you move it, and that's where they're probably going to be. On the right-hand side is a totally different set. So this is a type of marker that they'll do, and they'll take a type of wood that's very stringy and very resilient, and they'll twist the shit out of it. They'll just mangle the hell out of it, and you'll see it. You'll see it from quite a ways away. It stands out like a flag. And we've seen these in two different ways, and this is one of them, where it's more flamboyant and a lot more destruction. And then as well at this location, we also see where there's all kinds of weird random trees, especially in the higher ups. And in the very top of the photo, if you look, there's kind of a log in the very distance back there, and that's sitting there. But if you look right below it, there's something even more interesting. It's going to be hard to see, so I'll point it out on the screen. But right here, it's a blue and white basketball. Totally inflated, looks brand new. This particular area is not where people frequent. You don't find anything in there from people, there's nothing there. But here at a damaged location, at the end of tracking them with other signs, we find the location done this way, and there happens to be a blue basketball. You can factor that however you want. It brings a lot of different visions to mind. And in my head in particular is maybe George or one of the elders that goes out with and does things, bringing back a basketball for the kids here. Here the kids play with this, have this thing. And then of course it just gets better. They don't chuck the thing around. Okay, these are red posts. So this is part of their marketing. This is a big deal. Probably one of the most important aspects. And we do this because the reason is they do this on their travel corridors. Where they're going to occupy for a season or whatever when they're going in and out, they'll actually create signposts. And these aren't like the flags that we kind of showed before. And a flag can even be, I'll go back just a second, but a flag can even be a limb that they just snap toward one out of a large region, especially in these deciduous trees and forests. They'll just snap one twig and let it hang, and it will oxidize out, and it'll just sit there like a little flag and show up. And that'll normally be a travel corridor, maybe off a road cut, a power line cut, something like that. You look at the whole edge of the forest, just look for little tags hanging down, and that'll often lead you in. This is another way of a more permanent corridor. So where they've come in and out a long period of time, they'll remark the same thing year after year. So they'll take something like a cedar or dissimilar tree on the outer edge of the boundary where it's real dense, but on a corridor, maybe on a side canyon or an access or ridge line, where that joins, they will snap one off and then they'll rub it and deeply impregnate skin, hair, all this into that structure. We've seen that last over 5 years. Go back and be able to see the same hair deposition and then the new hair deposition from the following season. They might skip a season and then do it again, but it'll do right on top of the same post. So here, a different type of foliage manipulation. And if these look big, they are big. These are blinds and barriers in an area we call the Lodge Kill Zone, which is, we've only been in there a couple times, and I can't go into the full story, I wish I could today, but needless to say, up to 30 people a year have vanished off this trail structure. And USFS on my team, 19-year manager, officer, USFS, verified 37 people in 3 years. Now, this is a real dangerous, bad area, and this is intimidating to be in here, and the reason is because the type of construction we see, and this is a good example of just what they'll do to funnel deer. So in this case, they built a big funnel zone, cleared everything out in the middle of it, and they had a couple big ambush points made out of broken trees and boughs all stacked up 10 or 12 foot up. And so we actually camped. I put my tent right in front of us. We camped kind of in this corridor. It was just the best place to be. And so, but what we see is in the left-hand photo, we see a tree laying down across there. It doesn't looks pretty natural or whatever. And on the right-hand photo is its root base. Now the root base is over 6 feet tall from what we see right there, sticking on the ground. And if you'll notice, there's no hole below the roots. Now there is a fresh drop of dirt right in front of it, where a large clump of dirt fell off of it about 5 feet away from it. But that's not part of the ground. You can just pick that up. They carried that in. That's a 100-foot tree, all the limbs and branches on it when it was carried in green. And you can see how it's represented in the lower left photo. That tree alive would weigh 18,500 pounds. At the base thickness versus its height, you do the pine ratio, that's what it is. The tree in the foreground is over 90 foot. The tree, if you look closely, the tree behind the big root ball is another one laying there. And if we look behind that, right up here, there's another one, just as big. No hole, roots sticking on the ground. They carried these things in. Now look behind all that, see how dense that forest is. Can't imagine what it would be to carry a 100-foot, 18,000-pound tree into a forest that's so damn dense it's hard to get through. And they don't just carry one. They carry in like 10 of these things just to make a deer phone. Now, who's doing that? We see these examples in some other areas that are much smaller, these 4-inch trees and stuff, because the deer will kind of follow those edges at night. And they'll just walk them if you don't spook them. Well, here you can see this is just massive examples. Here's another example from the same group. Now, when they want to demonstrate to you, here's how big we really are, they do some pretty apparent things. And these are constructing some of the blinds as well. In the lower left-hand photo, it's tough to see. This is a root ball of a tree about 35 feet long, has all the pine needles on it, and everything else is like 8 inches thick, 10 inches thick. But this is the taproot. Now, not a lot of people anywhere have ever really seen a taproot attached to a pine tree. If they wash out a bank, or if there's a collapse of earth, you might see that. But in nature, the pine's not going to go down with that taproot attached. Ram a pickup into it at 100 miles an hour, it'll fall on the tree, and will move the tree. That's because of that root. To see a taproot that was pulled out from a living tree with the pine needles still on it, to understand what that takes to rip that tree out, it's the equivalent of shoving a large tree down, just like in Alaska. They were ripping these things out like carrots. And you can see the bend in that root had to go around a rock or other immovable object in the ground that was planted a couple feet deep. The anchoring effect of all that and not breaking the taproot is insane. It's like it's indicative of power that's just incomprehensible. I mean, it really, really is. Now, on the right-hand side, we see what's pretty common is an X. And in this case, both those trees, again, they're right there in the zone. Matter of fact, on the lower left-hand side, they actually see the stump base I showed you a moment ago, and you see how large that is. Well, the tree that leans over that, it's behind it about another 40 feet. And so the tree that leans to the left is over 90 feet, and the tree that leans on the right is 80-something. The base of the 90-foot one is 28 inches thick or so, and the other one's like 22. So those trees would go anywhere from 3,000, 3,500 up to like 7,000 pounds. And that's what they've used to show their X, to say, hey, here's a message. So we believe that both of these cases are evidence of prowess. When we're going to show you a marker, we're going to show you one that we know you can't do, that's beyond it, that demonstrates who we are. Okay, that's going to move us on to defecation. Now, that's the deposition of scat material. For those that don't realize that, and scat material is poo. And it's one of the, it seems like it's something trivial, and it's not something a lot of researchers, I guess, have the ability to find or work with or whatever, because it's so happenstance. But in our case, in a particular location, and with the way we conduct our operations, this just had to be one of the traits of the living animal, period. And that's what we found. We learned how to find where they deposit scat in any region that they're occupying for a length of time. And that's represented in studies that have recovered, or actually documented, not recovered, would be too much, 48 pounds in a single day we've been able to document. And it represented about 5 to 7 days occupation. And we know that because they defecate in groups. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is placement and grouping. And in the left-hand photo, you can see where there's 2 scat piles, and they're in riverbeds in this case. And they're always in generally 2 different types of locations. That's sandy bars and riverbeds, and then behind foliage groups up against obstructions. Now, in all cases, we see where the family goes as a unit. There'll be 7 piles of scat, and then there'll be one 20, 30 feet away from them. They all go relatively close, 4 to 6 feet from each other, something like that. And then there'll be one over here 20, 30 feet away. And we believe that they're all going while that one's watching. When they're done, he goes. And that's what it just seems like. We have to just guess on what that's inferred. But in the right-hand photo, you can see the scat piles aren't just something to guess out. They often, or if not most often, come with other evidence. And in this case, it's 20-inch tracks with a 3 to 4 inch track spacing, not an overall stride. Stride would be 7 or 8 feet. So something else that we'd like to talk about is the interpretation. We can get to know the subjects themselves if we can repeatedly find their material. That we can get to know them and more about them than you can almost any other way. And the reason this is titled Bigfoot GPS is because we can often tell where they're going in particular and when they're doing it and how often it takes or how long it takes to get from one region to another. On the picture on the left is cedar berries again. So this is part of the dietary treatment stuff. This is a scout where they've consumed cedar. On the right-hand side, it tells us an awful lot about location and diet and foraging and what you do to get between these two regions. So we have both Russian olive seed and pinyon pine nut, but we know that the closest these two species are to each other is right at 5 miles. And so we know that within this feeding time, within one time it's going to make one deposition, which may not even be a full day, maybe half a day. They're going to consume these things over a 5-mile stretch. In between this feeding, we know, it may have been farther, we don't know this, but they were able to get deer fur to feed it on deer. Deer remains at some point during that, a grasshopper leg. We assume that's travel forage, and a rodent bone. Now, all these are in with one scat, so you can see the diversity that they're able to get to, and the range they're doing it just over a feeding event. It's a lot broader than what people would expect how they're doing it. But this individual was probably one of the more transient individuals, the guy with the 17-inch foot, because he goes to a mountain. He's the only one we've ever seen up there. It's a little mountain. And he's got about 17 figure, and we assume it's a male by foot structure and activity, but he's up there alone, and he comes back down to the family unit. And this is also the one that occasionally ends up with bird seed and other things from domestic ranches and houses and things in this scat. Okay, so we're going to go into behavior. Now this is I don't know how this is going to work on this setup if we do our audio. So what I think I might do on this deal is because these guys don't have their audio set up to run out of here. I'm not sure where any sound is going to come from. We'll try to play a file. If it doesn't work, we'll just move on to it. And if you guys are interested, after this, we'll go ahead and jack with a little bit and we can play them. They are worth listening to. And if we can get one to roll, we see what we'll see. I don't know what will happen. This is a good one to test it on. So this one on the bottom right is a 15-second long howl. And it doesn't sound that long, I tell you here. Now, what's got a set of lungs like that? People say, well, they're wolves. I don't think so. So it sounds like we're going to get audio. Let's do this. Now, I've got some stuff here that's low frequency. So it goes basically from 0 hertz up within a range only about 60, 80 hertz. So this may not even produce that low sound. But I hope it does, because what I want to show you is if we have the right sound system, I might be able to put this over there and get it, is this will shake your chairs, these low range. But first, before that, we're going to go do something that's really, really cool. This is Bigfoot vocalization being answered by a mountain lion. We might have to turn it down. You can hear me running there. It just started to cut that short. So it's the same thing, goes on a little bit longer. Now these were recorded with that particular one with 36-inch ditch, 22 feet off the ground. The distance of that recording was probably 2 miles, if they were where we believe they were. This is a howl that was isolated with software, amplified and isolated. We'll go here. This is a howl with a following loop. And so what we heard there was a slight harmony. So we had one subject, and we had another subject chime in and harmonized, and then we had a small whoop from a third subject, and then that was over. So to bring in, and that's why I went to that one first. So we're going to go back and we'll do another harmony. And this is a little more complex. What this is also, it seems to be the large male vocalizing. The family unit is answering from a distance away and vocalizing back with him. And we even give her a little bitty one, we'll even try to do it, make a little squiggly crap on the spectrum. It's really cute. And that's where there's, all in all, there's 6 subjects in that. And you throw a spectrum analyzer, you can see each one of them, so it's pretty cool. Here's another, same group, same thing. I mean, to me, that almost verges on singing together. It's so cool. And then here's this whole sequence, I'm afraid we probably won't play this one. I think this one is like 15 minutes long or so. So let's go ahead and, before we try the subs, we'll get a screen. Now, this is done, this is distant. This is way out there. It's been brought in and amplified some, but. So it sounds crazy, but that's as good as we can process that out. Now let's try a subtone. These are the bass stuff. So this goes all the way down here for sound. I don't think the speaker will produce it. Maybe we'll try a thing or two to see what we get. Okay, that was it. It wasn't even able to even touch it. So we'll try to see it here. See, maybe this will go live. Yeah, it's so low frequency. Now it's audible on, like if we could pump it to what we've got playing right now, yeah, it would rumble you. It'll hurt your insides. It's nuts. It's not dangerous because these speakers aren't going to produce the low frequencies that you can do for sound hit, but it is every single bit that low. They're true vocalizations on the bottom end of the scale. It's pretty impressive stuff. Like I said, maybe when this is done, we can get a sound somebody plug it in. We'll try to figure it out. But until then, we're going to go on and move it to foraging, and we're going to roll through this stuff here pretty quick now. So what we're seeing in foraging is the move is a scattered group searching for individual and group resources. Gathering and consuming food while searching without collection. Collecting and delivering food to sedentary individuals at camp. Using top methods of plant-animal hatch and migrations, times and stages, and we've seen that through like gypsy moths, where they'll have a certain slope of a mountain at different times will mature. It won't be every slope. It'll be different slopes, this slope of the sun, whatever, and then gypsy moths, and they're large grubs, the size of almost my thumb. And what we've seen them do is pick up and move rocks up to 1,000 pounds and remove these things, but only right at the time of hatching, right when everything is going to occur, and they do this year after year. So we believe that this could only be through top methodology of understanding when they're going to hatch and getting used to going with other subjects to do this. So they'll also search as an individual subject. So transitory will hunt by themselves and search by themselves with no other thought process, no other subjects. So that'll take us into hunting. Hunting behavior. They'll use cooperative hunting techniques for small and large game. They'll funnel and direct deer into ambush positions by use of foliage barriers, like what we saw in the big trees. But they'll do that with small stuff as well, even just blocking gaps, putting twigs across just to keep animals moving in a certain direction. A funnel and direct deer activity with presence of vocal reports. So often when we hear what they're doing to us with little beeps and whistles and little grunts and things like that, they're often steering us the same way they steer deer. So they'll do this, we witness this happen, but they'll do this to steer deer. Deer will be heading the wrong direction, they'll make a small noise, they'll speak to that, they'll calm down, they'll walk kind of the other way, and they'll funnel them down and move them down without spooking them. They don't like it. So what we've seen, they do all this without upsetting the deer. Construct and utilize sound traps to locate both prey and danger. So we'll see we're in a trail structure, they'll lay down a bunch of linear branches, and then they'll put a crosshatch, and then another set, and then they'll dump a whole bunch of leaves in it. And you can't move through that. It's like 7 feet or whatever. Now they'll stop and hop over it, and it's like just too far to hop over without interfering something often. And so when we encounter them, we're almost like screwed, because they'll block every other access, and they'll make this thing here. So it's an easy way if they're in there anywhere, even laying down, and a deer's going to come walk through. They make sure they've got a zone they can hear what's coming in. So it's like, oh cool, I hear a deer. I'll get up and go get me a deer over there. But also at the same time, when we try to go in or anything else, they're also aware that, hey, something else is here. Build rodent small game traps, fashion nest sites. So we've seen this a couple of times. We can only assume that this is what's occurring. And they'll take a stump, flip the stump over, put a bunch of stuff that they'll put it out in an open space, like they'll remove a stump from where it was. They'll go into a flat open space, build it open around it. They'll put the stump there, they'll grab a bunch of dry grass, stuff it underneath the stump. It obviously doesn't go there, and sometimes when we go there, the stump will be down, sometimes the stump will be flipped, and then put back up again. And we can only assume what's happening is they're setting a nest area for rodents and things like where they're occupied. Somewhere that there's a clear zone around it so you can snatch them, and then they just go get whatever moves into it, so to speak. It's just pretty intelligent. Somebody's doing it. And it takes us to occupation. And this picture I want to note, I photographed this female, and the picture was, I wish it was better on here, sorry for that, but it's at a mile with a real big zoom, Sony camera. And this is her raw image, basically zoomed in. And she's standing 6'4" to elbow. And then actually what she's doing is there's another subject with its arm wrapped around her shoulder, and she's holding it by the leg, and that's George. And so I know him by visual sighting. He's every about 7 foot when this picture was taken. And he picked her up like a toddler. And we were at a mile, and she saw us on a ridge and scooped him up and walked off. And when she turned around and scooped him up is when I got the picture. And this is the same photo. It's not been doctored at all. I added from there down for scale, because that's when we measured, we used survey techniques to measure this. I didn't guess where her feet were. So we were able to plant the flat ground across where she was standing. We went and verified her prints. And so this is the line that he represented where she was. And so she was, this is 10 foot, and she's slightly crouched at 10 foot. Now what you'll notice is this is one of our guys. And he's only 5'7", granted, but a 5'7" guy, trying to put a person in a suit, 2 of him would fit their leg. You see what I'm saying? A human being can't occupy a suit that big. So when even at 9 foot, he said, well, somebody in a suit, no, they're not. Like, even at 9 feet, you could probably fit 2 of him in her leg. So she's 40 inches across the hips. That's what she scales at. So this is it. Okay, so occupation. They'll utilize an area about 2 square miles for 5 to 7 day period as a family group. They'll utilize an open range of approximately 100 square miles as a family group, give or take, depending on where they're at. Change areas impact grows, resources diminish to non-adjacent areas. And so this is as they utilize or they defecate all over the place and they chase off the deer and they eat whatever's in the ground, they'll move. And it's generally not just like they move in transition like an herbivore or something where they just kind of go as they graze. They'll generally just change locations. So they'll just pick up and go a mile downriver, whatever, and then they're in there for a week. After overall range due to seasonal weather or game migration, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. As the game moves, you're going to kind of follow that, and as it expands its route, like down level from the mountain during certain periods of months, and up level of the mountain during certain, they'll also follow that in their range. Utilize high rugged areas to retreat, solitary group, large males. So that's more, and that goes into a couple different things. Is part of the behavior of the species, but it takes up a couple different deals, whether it's hunting, where they all get up there and they go get game and take it to their various family units, whether it's just acquisition, the big males are there. But we've also often seen, well, you have a very large male, and extremely rugged, no way to get in there, really high altitude, and there'll be a proficient amount of big males. Why they do it, who knows? Maybe it's like a lot of natives will retreat to a lodge and do the male thing, do the adult thing, the elder thing. That may be what's going on, but either way, that's kind of what we see. So grouping, and this kind of, it's the same thing as what we just covered in that, but so grouping, 4 family units of 7+ subjects with females lead and mostly absent. So we've studied 3 family groups in pretty widespread areas, and all 3 seem to be somewhat similar. And also, there's a couple other people at Camp Collins for whatever have family units that are almost identical to ours, but they're in Michigan and a couple other places. And we find the same similar number of subjects in the unit, give or take, and the same size variation from the small to the big. It's very, very similar. So it's repeating things. So the family units seem to be quite similar in size and makeup. I'm not saying they all have 7 subjects, but I'm saying so what in our studies that would be the average. From large subgroups of young to hunt, forage for the unit often cause trouble. So we've seen a lot of subjects where feet 8 inches, 9 inches, anywhere like that, running around in a group of little teenagers being all ruckus and causing all kinds of racket, making a bunch of noise and teasing people and playing with things. And you know, it's indicative of young hominin behavior to be that playful and reckless and not have that understanding, and we kind of see that. Also form smaller subgroups of 2 to 3 older subjects to hunt large game and late. And that would be in an instance like we have 12 to 14 inch or 15 inch, somewhere up in that region, where they're getting boisterous and smart enough and good enough to be able to raid surrounding farms and do things they probably shouldn't be doing, still not wise to do, but now they become good and proficient at hunting and things, and they'll often form smaller subgroups and go out and acquire animals. And from, I don't know, we have no way of knowing if when they acquire something, if they consume it just those subjects, or if they do it as a group and they bring that stuff back. We have no way of knowing. Males often move a few miles away alone when young, but further mature. And we see that in the evidence of that 17-inch track subject in the one I discussed where he'd been moving the 5 miles. So he goes in with the family unit. You find his prints with them on occasion, maybe every couple of weeks, every week, you know, but he's obviously not there all the time. And we've known him, that was the same one who, when I started my whole introduction, who was banging on our house out there. And his prints were 16 inches then, and then over about a 4 or 5 year period of time, they were at 17 inches. And so when he stays on that mountain, for the most we can see, filming with thermal, recording the sound, watching, and he primarily stays up there alone. And I figure that's just a guy like a dude in his 20s would be if he was a modern human. He's gone out on his own, he's kind of alone, doing his thing, got his little apartment on the mountain, whatever. You know, but it seems indicative of that same behavior. I say seems because we can only guess. Large males will often retreat to the highest rugged dense areas together. We kind of covered that in the previous section. And I want to just go ahead and add to this, though. This is often where they're doing these giant feats of prowess. And it's interesting to me, is this the mentality of a bunch of big males being in there, being a little bit ruckus and looking at how badass I am and what I do and being tough? I don't know, but it seems to be part of their behavior. Now we're going to start to wrap this tonight. This is the last section, and it's modern view curriculum and classification. And the reason I include this is just for that last word, clarification. And that is because you're inundated all the time with information from pros and self-proclaimed pros, and other people call them pros and whatnot. But there are some very recognized individuals that have been in the big world for decades, let's say. And what they've told you the entire time, we've just believed, and we just listen to it, and it goes in one ear and it gets stuck, it doesn't go out the other. And that is when it's always been called a Gigantopithecus is the big one. Who, by the way, I'm going to just say, we've had a big credit in getting that terminology now to be changed to Australopithecus. But this person in particular in this school of thought has portrayed the Bigfoot species as a potential big ape, regardless of what kind it is. And there's a big debate, monkey, man, right? Big debate over this. Now, there is no real debate, And the reason I say that is because of the way scientific classification sees hominids or primates. And most people don't realize this, but when you have a professor or someone, a doctor or whatever, telling you that, yeah, it's a big bipedal ape and he's walking, his hind legs and everything, but it's a big ape and it came from Asia and all these things. Every other scientist, every other one that's ever studied anthropology or primate sciences understands a key factor, and I'll explain that factor now. And where we'll get this is from modern curriculum today. It's called Through the Lens of Anthropology, 2nd edition, 2019. Introduction to Human Evolution and Culture, chapter 2, page 50. You can look this up. It says, this is straight out of their deal, man, so don't ever think science doesn't believe in it either. Believers should be aware that if they do cite a Bigfoot, they should probably leave it alone. It probably isn't a large human-like ape. If it exists, it is probably a human who wants to be left alone, and nobody should do it harm. Recall that if a primate is bipedal, as Bigfoot is typically reported to be, is classified as human. Now, let's just take apart a couple of neat little parts out of this. It probably isn't a large human-like ape. Recall that if a primate is bipedal, as Bigfoot is typically reported to be, it is classified as human. You would go a little farther. It probably isn't a large human-like ape. That's what science says. Science across the board, the curriculum for anthropology does not agree with the top pro in the field of Bigfoot. Matter of fact, it contradicts them directly. This is the scientific view, so why would someone with a doctorate ever present any other view? It says, if a primate is bipedal, it is classified as human. But you've had people at the top level, we believe, saying it's an ape and agreeing that it's bipedal, when they know for a fact that directly contradicts the classification of primates. So I just want you to factor that in the next time that you're involved in this stuff. Now, another thing that doesn't quite work out is the DNA. Now, we've been involved at Oxford. Museum of Zoology was out of Switzerland. We were retained by them at their request to get them specimens for the Brian Sykes study called the Oxford-Lausanne Collateral Hominid Study. It was pretty interesting because it was a big study and it was advertised all over the world. Matter of fact, the whole world waited for it. It was late and everyone said, what's happening with the study? And I'll tell you right now, so we put in a specimen to start with that we already had. It was collected at 10,000 foot of Sandias. Matter of fact, not far from where the big stuff I showed you was. And it was on top of snow, scat pile, well, like what I've shown you with pine nuts. We have a sample of that scat pile over on the table. So we know what it was eating in the winter. We saw how it was eating, and there was a shelter there. And so I submitted that hair. It had a broken shaft. There was no follicle to the shaft, but we still submitted it. It was interesting though, because one of the things that they first released to the public, but there was no unknowns. There was nothing they couldn't identify. Well, I'm going to remind you that a scientific study like this, they have a classification or discrimination. So what happens is they're going to put a hair in, and any second-year biologist can identify if it's a bear, a coyote, or a rabbit, or any other known thing based on just a few traits, being the scale pattern and some other attributes of the hair. It's not hard to do. They do it every day. This is not rocket science by any means. Yet they say they tested and came up with a possum and a bear, and maybe a bear hybrid, and all this. Well, why'd they test them? Why would you do the DNA on the hairs that you know the animals they came from? And I'll show a rough example of that. Is they asked us for another specimen, and they said, we're going to hold the study until you get it for us. Can you get it? And I said, what do you want? They said, from a living animal. We want something fresh. And now, why would they have done that? We only sent them in one sample, and they were already claiming that nothing unknown had been discovered. Yet the hair, the paperwork I've got back, we still have it. The letter from Brian Sykes states that the hair shaft we gave them was unknown. They couldn't identify it. But they couldn't do a DNA work on it because there was no medulla and there was no backside of the hair, or no base. So, we took it upon ourselves and we told them, yeah, we'll a sample off of it. Now, here we go. So the subject able to do this with is actually the large cast on that table over there. That is the same subject who we tracked to get the hair. The hair was about 6.5 inches long, gray. It tapered the same as our Chuska hairs we have over there as well, that people can look at. It was basically the same design, the morphology to the hair identical to those, but it was gray and long. And sure enough, we were able to get up in there with him in position, move in, and he moved out. And when he moved out, he left the hair with a hydrated follicle. So it's less, in that part of the country, a hair follicle will dry out 10 minutes. So, because here they'll dry out 35 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. They'll already start to desiccate. And so that's why they wanted a living subject, something that now that we can get it. So we did, and we were fully intact, fully hydrated. We sent that in. Also, there was an archaeologist, somebody who was an archaeologist, but we also were U.S. Forest Service guy that was there off time when everybody was there. We had a few other people that witnessed to this. So we had this hair, and the hair had 170 tracks. We found yucca with bite imprints, we had handprints, feet print, we had all this other trace evidence to go with this find, with it. And as well, the collection of it was fully witnessed and done correctly on video. And then all the sample was transferred in a hermetically sealed, positive pressure chamber, the whole 9 yards into their packaging they sent us. It was bulletproof. We had a camera in the chamber, we had a camera outside the chamber, so that every time it was touched or messed with, the trace of custody was being videoed. So they couldn't claim contamination or anything else in the specimen. We wanted it bulletproof, so we did that. We put all that data together, we sent them the CD and all the information, we sent them the hair. Now they helped the study, and it didn't tell the world, they did it for 2 full months. We took to get that in there, get that to them. And then all of a sudden they go underground again. It takes quite a while. They finally come up and they say nothing unusual was found. We found a polar bear, another bear hybrid. We've got possum hair sent to us, and coyote, and all this other stuff. And they said they actually tested all these things, but there wasn't a word about that last submission that they held the whole study for. And what I show you here is the number. Now this is being curated in Lausanne, Switzerland, at the Museum of Zoology. But they told me it was for further future study. Well, that's not what they told the rest of the world. It's a blatant lie. But the sample exists, and there's the number to it. It's 25076. And if anybody, and it's part of the OLCHP study, if anybody would like to track that down, ask them where the hell it is, it should be nice. We can't get any response. No, this is we'll wrap this here pretty fast as I get on the computer up here again. This is another kind of a travesty. It's a bigger travesty. And I don't mean to call anybody out, but they're probably going to get called out by this, and I don't mind. Truth is what it is. I'm not a bearer of it, or anything more than the bearer of it, so it's not my fault. We did a study at the request of the University of New Mexico Gallup that you never probably heard about. Some people may have if they followed us, but you didn't hear about it anywhere else. And this study we did for them was a year-long field study. Now this is where I get my information on the ecology and behavior of the species. We're not trying to chase it down and get pictures of them or do anything else. It happens sometimes it doesn't. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We were there to study the ecology and behavior of the species, so that's what we focused on. Now, during that time, sure enough, we gathered a lot of samples, some of which were the Chuska hairs, which are on my table, which are basically undeniable. They came from a visual sighting of the subject. He did the thing, we went and got him. It was all straight across. Every bit of sign was there, everything was done. So we would call that a 99% confidence on that event. So we had a lot of samples of it. And involved in this whole year-long thing, at the culmination of it, we were brought in to do a presentation, kind of like this, but to the faculty and the professors and everyone in the college, plus the students. And for the first time, the university had opened up its doors to the public for one of these type of presentations. And where we are at this point is on the Navajo Reservation, and the University of Gallup on the Navajo Reservation. And normally, in a lot of they tend to be kind of hush-hush, and this is our deal, and it remains our deal, and you guys just stand, and we're all good. So, but in this case, they knew what was kind of being brought to the table. And so actually, for the first time, some of the elders of the Navajo Nation appeared and wanted to talk and tell their part and explain to everyone in there who they really were. this was neat because of part of their heritage. They saved them after their long walk when they were marched off. When they got back, the elderly and the children were all still alive. And they said, how the heck did you survive? And it was those subjects in the Chuska that kept them alive. So to them, they're very important. They're people. And we respect that. So they all came out in droves. And I mean, they doubled the largest attendance in the 47-year history of the campus for anything they've ever done. And so there was public interest, a lot of public support. I go into all this detail because I want you to realize how important this study was and the firsts that were happening here. For one at college was actually doing a year-long field study on the species. Now you'd think you'd have heard about all this stuff. And you can see on the screen, there's a question being posed here. And that's because all the DNA samples were given to Dr. Meldrum. And at that time, I didn't want to necessarily believe that there was anything sketchy. I knew the University of Oxford, Brian Sykes, and said, okay, well, we've done that deal, and we're not going to do that again. But in this case that we brought in Dr. Meldrum, we gave him all the DNA samples. He was instructed to give them to 3 domestic laboratories here in the U.S. He volunteered his service. And so it was all granted him from the executive director of the university. Here you go. Now, for the full year of the study, we inquired not just where are the specimens at, but and what labs are they at, and what are the result status, and all this. And we were inquiring. He never returned a phone call. Now, this is to the executive director. It's not another professor. The executive director of this university is calling him. Malcolm won't return the calls. So at the end of the year, it was set to and asked if Meldrum would present at our conference or at our presentation we were doing, symposium. And he agreed, so he showed up. Well, naturally, we added 2 full days in there on this study. But on the day I presented 4 hours, and he presented his presentation on Gigantopithecus and his theories behind that, which is great. It's an excellent presentation, really. And but we had asked him during this, we actually kind of cornered him and said, hey, man, what in the hell? He never answered the phone. Basically, the executive director saying all this and said, where's the DNA samples? And Mr. Meldrum told him, I don't know. And then he just kind of went back to eating or whatever. And I was dumbfounded. And I said, no, where are they at? He gave me an I don't know. Where's the trace of custody? Where did they go? And he said, well, I gave it to Brian Sykes. It was the only person we told him, do not, for one, send them overseas, and do not send them to Brian Sykes, because we just went through the whole Oxford fiasco. And then he just went back to eating like he was apathetic. He didn't care. He was like, and I'm thinking in my head, I can't even, because it's university level stuff. This is academics. This is no personal. This is no bias. This is no nothing. This is hey, you offer to take these labs. Here you go. And then they just trash. So there's no trace of custody. There's no. Next thing you know, the director, University of New Mexico gal, was being brought up on charges for committing fraud, for faking a study, stealing the money because they had no evidence to back it up. Okay? It went so far as a state senator proposing law to prevent the study of mythical creatures. Okay, so did Meldrum pop up in that guy's defense? No, and I'm not doubting anything. I gotta tell you guys what happened, period. This is what happened. And we can prove it, I mean, in this way, because then KRQE, a network news station there in Albuquerque, New Mexico, did a 22-minute special. In that special was all about this fraud. It was a special investigation, like we see the news do. Big deal, accusing him of fraud, and had our teams all over it. I had to get on them and told them, you remove our names out of absolutely every bit of that. There's gonna be hell paid for this shit. And they did. They pulled us out. They didn't pull members of our crew. They got videos of us in the field. They threw the director executive absolutely under the bus. And nobody came in defense of this. Nobody. He was being brought up on serious charges. And they used a group and some professors who represent a group called the New Mexicans for Scientific Reasoning. And they're almost all of them are PhDs in all kinds of fields, from astrophysics to biology to everything. And a lot of them are the retired scientists from our defense laboratories. As a matter of fact, Sandy and Los Alamos labs are right there. And so I contacted them. They were on the news as the people claiming that it doesn't exist, it's a mythical creature. These were the top guys in the whole 9 yards. Well, so I contacted them. Said, hey man, I'll prove these crap's real. And they just love it because they're the Mexicans for scientific reasons. What they do is debunk everybody's high technology and all their whatever devices and everything else. It's a peer group that you deliver this to, and they tear